is here in the space, Professor Zimmerman's class, along with community members. I think we may even have some alum and faculty. So really beautiful welcoming people here. Just a couple of things as we get going. I wanted to let you all know, you probably see that the recording is happening. So we are recording because this is a unique opportunity to bring us together and to hear from Roberto Lovato. So if you don't feel comfortable with that, then please feel free to, we want to see you, but if you don't feel comfortable being recorded, go ahead and turn off your camera. We see that all the mics are off, which is beautiful. We will have a chance to hear from you all shortly though. So I did want to say a little bit to get us going. As I said, it's a unique opportunity to have so many wonderful people in the space that are all super committed to enhancing what it is that we know about Central America and Central Americans in terms of our contemporary period. I wanted to pause a bit and just have us reflect on what does it mean to come together, especially at a time when Centroamericanos, Central American Americans within the US are still so invisible in our schools, in our society, and there's still so many silences that exist, both in schools and society, and even within our own families, which I know in our class we've been talking about, and I think will probably come out of our discussion today. I think about this time in terms of the silences regarding legacies of US imperialism, in terms of manifestations of US violence throughout Central America, but also across multiple borders, along with the silences in terms of mass caging, incarceration of Central Americans, and literal genocide in its multiple manifestations, most recently, as we know, with regard to the separating of families and reproductive assaults on women in detention or imprisoned in these sites. It's really in this context and in more that we come together to create in many ways what I believe as this three-part series, right? A space of affirmation, a space to draw on Roberto Lovato's concept of unforgetting, right? To remember and all the politics that come with it about unforgetting and remembering. And I want to say that it's super important to acknowledge that this space in many ways is also decades in the making, that it's taken crucial activists, family, people on this call as faculty members to create space for Central Americans and make space for Central Americans within the Academy. And so I definitely want to shout out Roberto Lovato for his decades-long work, but also my co-collaborators, Siapa Portillo and Adelis Zimmerman, to have the two of you in our Department of Intercollegiate Chicanx Latinx Studies has made a world of difference in terms of opening up conversations. And we know that students have always been asking for more, and some of you I see on the screen smiling and acknowledging that labor and the work and that still needs to be done. I want to thank our supporters, certainly the Intercollegiate Department of Chicanx Latinx Studies, Janet Hernandez, the academic coordinator who is here and doing a lot of the behind the scenes work always in keeping us going and documenting the work that we do, but also the Chicanx Latinx Transnational Field Group at Pitzer College, the Teaching and Learning Committee at Pitzer College, and the Pomona College WIG Teaching and Learning Innovation Grant. So a lot of acknowledgements, a lot of affirming of why we're here, how we're here, and even before I get to introduce Roberto Lovato, who will be sharing with us his work. But before I do, let me say a little bit about him. So Roberto Lovato is an educator, a journalist, and a writer. He's also the author of the book that some of you have had the chance to read, and we will hear a bit about today. I know that my class has not had the opportunity, but I think that you will just be inspired to do that in your next reading. The name of the book is Unforgetting, a memoir of family, migration, gangs, and revolution in the Americas. Thank you for holding it up. He's the recipient of a reporting grant from the Pulitzer Center, and his writing has appeared in many different venues, including the Boston Globe, the Guardian, Foreign Policy, the LA Times, Guernica. So he's widely known for his kind of journalism. You will see the powerful storyteller that he is, all the vulnerability that he brings to his writing, he brings into his speaking as well. On a personal note, I would like to say that I had the joy of meeting Roberto Lovato when I was still just starting graduate school back in the early 90s and 1990s. I was a graduate student at UCLA studying sociology. Central American Studies was far not even part of any of our courses, let alone even a book or anything to talk about. But I was a field studies coordinator at UCLA working to connect students with local organizations. And it was through the work of Roberto Lovato as the executive director of CARES and the Central American Resource Center that I first had the opportunity to meet him. I should also say that he was the founder, co-founder of Central American Studies at Cal State Northridge. And so for those of us that are looking for ways to expand Central American Studies, he has much to say in that regard as well. I want to thank you, Roberto, for all you've done over the years, for sharing time and space with us today. And I want to warmly welcome you into this space. So before I hand the floor over to you, I'll say a little bit about the format. So the plan for today is Roberto has kindly agreed to read some of his new work to us, and then we will have a chance to pause and open it up for questions, comments, reflections from you all. So if you haven't yet thought of those questions, think about the things you want to bring into the space about identities, communities, storytelling, right? And so we will hear from you. We'll begin first with students to respond, and then we'll save a little bit of time for community members and others who might want to chime in. But without further ado, please join me in giving as warm as we can in the Zoom sphere. Welcome to Roberto Lovato into our space. So use your applause. You can unmute yourself if you want, but you're seeing the applause around. And I'm going to hand the floor over to you, Roberto.
Wow, thank you, Jill. After so many years, I finally see you again, at least in a stream. I've seen you on Twitter and other spaces. It's been beautiful to watch you evolve into a prominent scholar in our community, and you know, despite your youth. It's my honor and privilege to be with you all. I mean, I've also seen, you know, Arely and Tuyapa kind of grow into these ferocious beasts of academe, Central American academe. So it's a nice thing when, because I can remember when, even before Central American Studies, there was nothing. I had to kind of latch on to Chicano culture just to be Latinx, Latino. You know, so we don't realize how far we've come until we look back. You know, so you know, I think we should just go right into it, right? Instead of dithering a bit, because our time is limited. So do you want me to maybe read something? Given the nature of your class, Gil, I thought I would start at the beginning of the book. Actually, no, let me start at the end. I have a part that I like at the end, that kind of, where I'm trying to, you know, my story is about different things, one of which is how we piece together the fragmented bones of our histories, the histories of our countries, like El Salvador, the United States, and the history of our families. They're both connected. We're all part of history, and we're all makers of history, whether we know it or not. So I want to make sure all you students out there know that you are a part of history, you contain it, you have the power to change it, individually sometimes and socially, definitely. So this is me trying to put together all the pieces at the end. I'm at a coffee shop not far from where I'm at right now on Mission Street at a place called Café La Bohème on 24th near Mission. And I'm just reflecting on all this journey I've gone across 2,500 miles of war, genocide, 2,500 miles and 30 years of war, genocide, going to mass grave sites, having death squads trying to kill me, falling in love in the middle of war, you know, following the migration path after the war, watching the birth of the gangs into these more violent entities when they started off really non-violent in the 70s, and watching the growth of the industries of policing, counterinsurgency policing that help create the gangs and create the problems and worsen them. So I'm trying to put it all together at this coffee shop. And, you know, my grandmother was a seamstress, so there's this coffee table at this coffee shop that I really like, because My grandmother had a Singer sewing machine, and the table that I worked on at La Boheme was this old Singer sewing machine turned into a coffee shop table where I would eat, write, and do things. So here we go. I'm sitting at my favorite table at La Boheme on 24th near Mission with my laptop in front of me, attempting to stitch together the disparate pieces of my origins as I write this book. The varnished oak tabletop sits on the base of an antique sewing machine. It's 12 by 10 iron treadle, and the iron gears it powers still in place. Even though there's no longer a sewing machine above, the pedal moves the metal beast lying below most consumers' awareness. Its black latticed elegance and noisy rotation remind me of bouncing on the lap of Mamate, the Salvadoran seamstress whose máquina de coser fueled her family's 3,000-mile journey to San Francisco. Pushing the pedal slowly, I start typing. The pin attached to the pedal of the sewing machinery below pushes and pulls the treadle wheel. To the annoyance of the techie sitting next to me, it squeaks every few revolutions, but still the wheel turns. Up and down, up and down, up and down, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 motion of my foot working the treadle hypnotizes me. Next to the wheel, in the center of the space below the table, sits the machine's wrought iron logo, slightly rusty silver and plated black laurels, garnishing the Art Deco letter spelling the Singer Manufacturing Company. Coming here is a ritual of mine, something about coming to the neighborhood of my birth, to ride atop an old Singer sewing machine in a cafe named for the romantic opera La Boheme makes it easier to recover the fragments of my childhood and adolescent memories, especially the ones that are often more painful to conjure. I look out the window and up the street towards Horace Mann, my old junior high school, and I remember the shame, confusion, and molten anger I felt as a kid. I always had a sense somewhere deep within me that Pop, my father's secrets, my family history and upbringing, had something to do with his emotional absence and his violent temperament. Even as it inspired his magic and charisma. Yet I lacked the history and therefore the context to understand him. Like the many Salvadoran skeletons lying scattered and unstoried all over the southwestern part of the North American continent, Pop's memories, which might have assuaged my own nihilistic rage by helping me understand and address its source, were lost for decades. Today, the plight of many Mara kids, the plight of the many Mara kids I've met fits the shit travels downward theory of violence that I developed when I started going to Berkeley, a theory I came up with thanks in no small part to Pop. This downward momentum is created by the silence of both victims and perpetrators of violence, keeping us stuck in those moments, enabling the same cycles to play out time and time again. My search for my own unknown past is one reason I was so enthralled by the Instituto de Medicina Legal, the IML, the forensic lab in El Salvador, a vault of so many untold stories. Watching their rituals of forensic recovery led me to believe that unforgetting is a critical way to start the process of individual, familial, and national healing. The power to reconstruct the bones of a person and return them to the family haunted by the disappearance of their loved one enables a critical step toward healing. It is the knowing that their loved one is dead and how he or she died that allows these families to conduct burial rites and mourn. Without this unforgetting, they can have no closure and are held in terrible limbo. The same applies to reconstructing the bones of our personal and national memories, including the memory of what it is to be American, the identity that has caused so much devastation to those of us who identify as Salvadoran.
Thank you, Roberto. Yeah, a lot of hearts coming through. There's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to see if anyone wants to chime in, kind of things that stood out, that resonated, that you want to follow up on about memory, about reconstructing, healing. the image of the sewing machine was powerful for me because I think about my own grandmother, my own abuelita here in La Fuente. Was actually both of my grandparents were seamstresses.
It was one of the major ways that women in the period when my grandmother and my father were growing up in a shanty town in El Salvador, could kind of have an alternative form of work at the time. And you even have someone like the most famous seamstress in Salvadoran history, ¿cómo se llama? Prudencia Ayala, who was an indigenous woman who became the first person to run for president in El Salvador in its history. And she paid for her ride to the president, you know, to candidacy, which was eventually rejected by the courts because of patriarchy and the legal system. But still, she launched it. She became a historic figure because of her sewing machine. So I love that metaphor because, you know, we're all, you know, kind of shredded and fragmented people, you know, as a virtue of empire, of violence, of history against different groups of people. And our job, I think, is to piece together that past in a way that is not just makes us a little more whole, but is also beautiful to the degree possible. I tried to the best of my ability to make the book beautiful. I don't know if I succeed, but le di el todo por el todo.
Thank you. Can we open the space up and hear from you? Questions you might want to ask based on what you've heard, connections with your own work that you all have been engaged in. I know people have written about the shame and the retelling and the learning and breaking those silences.
Several of our students in this class, shout out to the 230 Latinx citizenship class, I guess I think more than almost all of you are doing oral histories, Roberto. Many of them are dabbling in oral histories for the first time. Many have chosen to interview family, you know. So, and then, you know, they're working on their little, you know, their interview protocols and whatnot. And I think this is really inspiring just to see you writing this memoir based on some of that oral history that you did for your own family. So I just wanted to encourage the students in our class, and as well as all the students here, to, you know, if you want to ask Roberto questions about that process, right?
Let me speak a little bit to that, if I may.
Yeah.
Readily. And thank you for crossing over the border of time into this segment of today's journey. You know, I wish I could bring students, the closest I can bring students into my heart is in the book. One of the things that I wish I could have gone into more was what I feel like as a human being now, after the journey that I take into all these different underworlds that I've talked about in the previous, but that I need to mention to Gilda's students, because, you know, some of them haven't read the book. My book is in a way about an underworld journey down into different underworlds that I've grown up in. My dad was here in the Mission District where I live at the center of a criminal underworld of contraband. He even would run guns from San Francisco here in the Mission to El Salvador and other contraband. And so I had kind of a deep shame about it as a kid because I didn't know how to handle it, because I also had this kind of like to read the Bible, and it didn't seem like my dad and the Bible were in agreement. So how the hell do I deal with that? And there's the underworld of later on of like the fact that my dad didn't have any pictures of his family in the living room, just my abuelita, Mamate, the seamstress. Everybody else was erased for some reason, and it was silent, and I didn't know why. I go into the book into why that is, and it's a deep secret that my dad went through. And then there's just the underworld of like the FMLN guerrillas that I had joined during the war when we were fighting a fascist military dictatorship responsible for 85% of the killing of somewhere between 75 to 80,000 people. So you had the US-backed government supported by Ronald Reagan and other presidents prior to him, doing, training, arming, and protecting the military and death squads that would go to towns like El Mozote during the war and wipe out the entire town of almost 1,000 people. And half of the people slaughtered were slaughtered by, were under 12 years old. And half of the people under 12 were under 6. So the only people that do that kind of thing are fascists, really. People do that, that's a fascist. So, a lot of us are talking about fascists here. We're in an early stage. And I wrote the book to kind of bring people into that past that's been forgotten. And I want people to feel what it was like, what the heart of a revolutionary feels like. We all have it. It's all a matter of whether or not we acknowledge it. Revolution isn't some foreign thing. It's a reality in human history. Revolutionaries are among us. 1 of every 3 Salvadoreños was organized against the Salvadoran fascist military dictatorship during the war. So I take this journey across all these different underworlds, the underworld of immigrant prisons where, for example, mothers and children are being, imprisoned, or where children are being caged, or families are being put in concentration camps. And I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Barack Obama, who started that path, along with the separation of tens of thousands of Central American children from their parents. So that's an underworld that a lot of people want to deny. When I started reporting on this on national television, I would be told afterward, hey, you're going to offend the Black community by criticizing Obama. I said, well, sorry, go to hell. My commitment is to the truth, not to some bullshit notion of race that you have. So, the truth is that's what Barack Obama did. I have the receipts. But, this country doesn't want to hear him. So we have to go to the underworld in order to get over the superficial truth that people try to throw on us, that I think in the case of Latinx people right now, and in the context of what you're studying in your class, is urgently critical. Our people are the ones whose COVID deaths are erased. Our people are the ones who are doing a lot of the essential work. That's being erased and forgotten. Our people are the ones whose young people are being shot and killed by LAPD, Sheriff's Department, San Francisco Police, and others. Our people are the ones whose stories don't matter in a country that still thinks it's black and white, right? So, we need to unforget. Otherwise, we're going to continue to be treated the way we're being treated. And that was one of the major motivations for writing this book.
Hi, my name is Sara. I'm a senior at Pomona. Coincidentally, I am actually in the process of writing my senior thesis and applying for grad schools. And your book kind of fits perfectly into all of it, which I'm really excited to read, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, as I continue with my applications and my thesis. But one thing I've been thinking a lot about, both for my thesis and for grad school, is the process of storytelling and what that means in terms of relationships with our families, and what that can mean for our families, both in bringing up these histories and breaking those silences, and as your title says, unforgetting these stories. So I just kind of wanted to know a little bit about your experience with your family and talking about these and putting this out into the world, for the world to read and appreciate and learn from.
And sometimes criticize. That's another story. Great question. Yeah, I had to kind of do a lot of thinking before embarking on this journey. Like I told the previous class, I did 2 things before I started on the journey. The journey begins when I'm in a immigrant prison, because I don't call them detention centers. That's propaganda language. It's a lie, right? Those are immigrant prisons for children and mothers, mass produced by the Obama administration, expanded by the Trump administration. So you know, and I'm kind of at a point in 2015 where I had just broken up with my partner and my stepson, who I raised since he was 6. And so that was a crisis moment for me in my life, the cosmic egg of my being cracked. I didn't know who the hell I was. And I had all this inherited pain from the past, from my life of 30 years of war and all this other stuff. And so, and even the stuff before that. So, you know, who the hell am I now? And I'm kind of ignoring the Salvadoran thing because it can be very painful. Those of you that are Salvadoreño know it can be very painful to be Salvadoreño. Like the great poet Roque Dalton said, todos nacimos medio muertos en 1932. We were all born half dead in 1932. That half dead feeling is what makes for gang members, for death squad operatives, for soldiers, for cops. So it's a heavy deal, this half dead feeling that we have. So I had to be very careful how I approach my story. And I got a therapist who helped me map out emotionally the journey I was going to take. And then I had to figure out the structure of my narrative. And, you know, along the way, I'm like, man, in order to really tell the story that I want to tell, I have to talk about my dad, my relationship with my dad, because my story really, a lot of it's about father and sons. You know, my mom's there as an important figure as she was in my life, but that's my next book. This is about me and my dad. And, you know, the relationship between fathers and sons has a lot to do with the relationship between people and la patria, right? Because padre, father, and patria, country, nation, come from the same etymology, language-wise, right? And they're connected. So in the book, I'm trying to connect the relationship between padre, patria, patriarchy, and violent patriarchy. And so, and I'm also trying to, like, you know, show my point of view of, say, gangs as a young man that belonged to a clique where we robbed people, where we stole, where we were violent, where, you know, we were low riding and doing some things that were against the law and considered from the outside criminal. And so to embark on that journey, I had to carefully construct a structure and then kind of map it out emotionally so that I didn't do myself damage. And I encourage you and anybody that's going to take on a journey of storytelling to really think carefully and how you're going to do it slowly. If you do it quickly, it may not work out as well as you take it slowly. It's like love. I think love can be and should be oftentimes a very slow matter. Sometimes fast too, but slow is good too. So, you know, I would encourage, I embarked on this with a desire to do justice. And there's a concept in America Latina called memoria histórica, which is the excavation of the history and the memory that serves the purpose of social justice. So I wrote with a very particular focus. I hope this answers some of your question.
Yeah, hi, my name is Juan. I'm a second year at Pitzer, and I would just like to start by thanking you for your time and for your vulnerability through your stories. You said that you try to make these stories as beautiful as possible, and that's something that caught my attention because through storytelling, sometimes it's very easy to make things, when you talk about traumatic experiences, it's really easy to make them very upsetting, but it's also really easy to create this very romanticized version of what you're talking about. So I guess my question is, how do you find that balance between being honest, but also keeping a sense of hope in these stories so it's not just depressing for the reader?
That's an excellent question. What's your name?
Juan.
Excellent question, Juan. How do you balance between, yeah, it's a difficult balance because we live in an environment saturated by two-dimensional images of pain and sound bites of suffering, especially when it comes to reporting on Central Americans, as I've documented, for example, the Columbia Journalism Review, where I looked at the sources for stories on child separation in 2018. And I had volunteers helping me. And what did we find in terms of how many Central American experts were in the stories of Central American child separation by Trump? Want to guess? In all the major media, in one of the most popular stories of 2018. Anybody want to guess? Let me say the
0.
actually, that would be partially correct. The correct answer is ni mierda. Okay, no había ni mierda de expertos like yourself, Arely, like Suyapa, like Gilda, and other scholars who are now part of this thriving intellectual community. So when you don't have experts like scholars, when you don't have journalists who are Central American, when you don't have community leaders like Larissa Cuadra here in San Francisco, Marta Arevalo in Los Angeles, when you don't have Central American lawyers, you basically have reduced Central Americans to a voiceless people who are two-dimensional, who are these, you can cut and paste us into images of and stories of other people. And so the way that so you don't want to do that, then you don't want to romanticize. I think that's a lovely way to say that. You don't want to romanticize. So the way I did it in my book was to just to try to be true and to notice the beautiful. You know, like I had one of the great loves of my life is in the center of the book. When I had joined the guerrillas, and I have a love story that involves a woman whose name is G. She didn't want me to name her because for different reasons that, you know, are very private and personal to her. And, but so G was a guerrillera and a diplomat with the guerrilla, and we fell in love. And there's a love story at the center, the way I tell the story of what it means to be revolutionary. And so, I mean, there is romance in our lives, even when there's in the midst of terror and war and destruction. And so I just had to be honest about that in the telling. And I just had to write in a way that I know G would say, yeah, that's what happened. Right? I experienced something like that. That's the best we can do. Remember, when we're reconstructing memory, memory is inaccurate by its very nature. So you're going to be not making things up, but you're going to have issues of how different people see the past, right? That's what makes the history interesting. And so, yeah, I tell the very difficult realities. I don't go into what I call too much of, I don't go into what I call violence porn, pornography of violence, where it's sensationalized and used. I try to just kind of use my journalistic skills to kind of report facts and observations, and then adding my own, because I'm a memoirist in this book, so I can add my opinion, my experience, how my body twitches when I see things, how my body twitches when I see in Portland right now, they're kidnapping, you know, the federal government and heavily armed men kidnapping protesters and putting them in anonymous, in unmarked vans. Well, that will happen to me. They try to pick me up and kill me in El Salvador like that. And so I'm not going to tell that as a romantic story, but they were trying to pick me and G up in the middle of my story. And we were at the beginning of our love story, and our love story included being pursued by death squads. And we escaped, and we had this fabulous love life. How am I not going to be romantic? Because you have to be. There's a difference between like romanticismo, which is kind of the sickly, kind of just, I mean, honestly, like the way that a lot of non-Salvadorans would look, let's say non-Salvadorans of a white persuasion in many cases, would look at the revolutionaries with the exotic gaze as an object of like romance. And it's kind of like not based on who we were, but of what we were. That's one form of like, that. I don't advise that. But there's also the romanticismo that G taught me about, which was you need to have a romantic spirit for the world you're going to face right now. Not just with Trump, not just with the decline of the economy, not just with neo-fascist rise or COVID-19. If you deal with that, you're still going to have to face the fight of your life, which is climate change. To face all these challenges, you're going to have a degree of high operatic emotional commitment to something greater than what exists, because what exists right now in the waves, on the internet, in your lives, is heavy propaganda that is designed to make you hopeless, fearful, and without any hope for overcoming the ravages of capitalism. And that's bullshit. So my book is about that delicate balance between romanticismo on the one hand and romance real that we kind of need a dash of to face the challenges.
Hi, I'm Bianca. I'm a second year at Pomona, and I'm in Ochoa's class. So I kind of had a question because you mentioned like revolutionaries are everywhere, like people who will lead a fight are among us. So like I wanted to ask, like, having both parents immigrate, cruzando la frontera, like that pain, like how do I ask them of like how would you say asking about histories without exploiting their pain, and also with just like without, because they've been made to feel invalid because of their lack of education, how do I say like your stories are important and I want to know about them without causing pain and with saying they're valid?
Ray, what's your name?
Bianca.
Bianca, excellent question. Where's your family from?
San Luis Potosí.
San Luis Potosí, donde Cristo perdió el huarache, dicen. So, how do you do it? Let me tell you how I did it. I was never trained. I learned in la práctica as a journalist. I'm Salvadoran, so I was exposed to war and trauma from the get. And so the question is, how do I get at those secrets in my family that are there, many of which are painful? One is very carefully. No se hace así nomás. You got to do a lot of homework, lay the groundwork like I did, like I described my own process with myself, mapping out the emotional terrain, doing the research beforehand, trying to understand, like, I had found out a bunch of stuff about my dad's hometown before I started asking him about his hometown. And I was at a better point in my relationship with my dad because my relationship with my father was rocky, right? My father had a violent temperament and, exposed me to violence and humiliation. And he was the one who more than anybody turned me into a rebelde, right? Like the gang say, you treat me like a dog, I become a wolf. I became a revolutionary wolf. And so, eventually I had to find a moment in my relationship with my father where things had healed a bit and were softer and better so that we could exchange. And I showed him and I was committed to his story over time. That's the other thing, you have to take your time. You can't just parachute into your parents' life. Hey, tell me about what you suffered. Tell me about, I found out the difficult fact that my mom had been raped when she was younger. I was the one that had to find that out from my tia. And it took me a while. I didn't even search for it, but my tia gave it up because I was searching for answers about myself and about my relationship with them. And so do your research, take your time, map out the terrain, and be very gentle and caring as you approach it. Y darles cosquillas. Dándole cosquilla, they give up, the piñata will give up the candy. So you don't hit the tortilla all the time, the piñata, you can also tickle it. And the piñata will give up the candy over time. That's the best I can tell you. It's a long-term project. You're not going to get the answers immediately. There's no magic pill, but you have to commit to taking the journey into that underworld, and the payoff, the benefits for yourself, for your family, for your community are enormous. I can tell you because having taken the journey of this book, I am as healthy as anybody's ever seen me, to the point where my father says, mire, mijo, ¿usted qué está haciendo? ¿Cómo? ¿Qué? Que lo siento más, ¿cómo se dice? Lo siento más suave. It feels me softer. Why? I said, hey, Papa, I just wrote a book about genocide, mass graves, war, and a bunch of other shit that I've seen in life and our relationship. And I'm aware of what made you who you are. Because my father was a recipient of most of my anger, as much as like Ronald Reagan. I was a really angry dude back in the day. And, just the process of coming to awareness about myself and about my family softened my heart to my father. And I understood, I don't allow people to hit me or abuse me anymore, but I understand what makes the abuser, especially when that abuser is in my family. So that's a difficult but necessary journey, and you can't approach it with anger. You have to be cold and look at it objectively so that they don't feel judged. Because if your parent feels judged by you, se acabó. You're either going to get a fake story, like the official story of a government, right? Because that's what governments do, is when they're pressured, they give up the fake story. So do families, so do the authorities in the house, padre y madre a veces. So I hope that helps a little bit, Bianca. Excellent question.
Gracias.
Hi, I just wanted to start off by thanking you. My name is Karina. I'm a third year at CMC and also a CHOAS class. And my question is kind of, after you've gone through the oral histories, how do you piece it together? And like, where do you find your start and end in terms of like all of the oral histories that you've gathered?
Man, that's a writer's question or a researcher's question or both. Good question. What's your name again?
Karina?
Karina. I have a niece that's named Karina. She's 8 years old though. She's my niece's daughter. So, I mean, the first thing is you have to gather the stories, like I was describing to Bianca, right? You gather the stories, you record them in different ways, whether it's a recorder. Sometimes you can record people and just, people act differently when they know there's a recorder. Sometimes it's good to just write things down. Okay, talk to me and just write it down, right? Sometimes people are okay with recording, but you got to watch out for the recording because sometimes people act like they're talking to the radio or something. They give some fake ass answers. So, but in terms of how do you bring it all together? That's the work, because that goes to the issue of, well, what is this really all about? Like the passage where I'm at the coffee shop that I read to you was me trying to figure out, man, what does this all mean? Because it means a lot of different things, right? Any story means more than one thing. There's no one meaning to any one story, I think. That's how I view storytelling. So yeah, when you writing is like life. You have to make choices as a writer, as an author. So I can't tell the whole story of my family because that's impossible just logically. You can't tell the whole story of a family. You just can't. Any storytelling is always going to be parts of the story that are put together in a way that feels like it tells a larger point, right? Are you with me so far? Okay, so then you have to decide, okay, what do I really want to emphasize? And so in a memoir, I have to emphasize, well, my book's really about unforgetting. My book is about the act of excavating the heart, the Salvadoran heart, lost in the darkness of history, of lies, of repression, of family violence, of humiliation, etc. So I decided that's what it was going to be about. Because it could be about, hey man, this is how I learned to be a journalist or something, right? But that's not, I felt like it was more important to talk about this idea of unforgetting that it's not just a Salvadoran story, but it's a story about the US and what the US did to El Salvador and to the Salvadoran people, the US government. But US people that also came in solidarity with El Salvador, right? Because the difference between the government and the people. So I chose this idea, I chose this idea of unforgetting based on a reading about the Greeks who had this underworld journey of unforgetting that the dead had to take before they went on to Elysium or Hades, which are kind of like the Greek heaven and hell, but they're not heaven and hell. Don't confuse them. And so people that study fascism like Hannah Arendt, who you should read, who gave us the phrase, the banality of evil, which is kind of like the way evil becomes normal. And so the way evil becomes normal is enabled by forgetting. If you forget there was a massacre, it makes it easier for the people that do the massacre to do it again. If you forget that there was fascism, it makes it easier for fascism to make a return to a place like the United States right now. So I decided that on a personal level, the same thing. If I allow myself to forget the parts of my father that aren't talked about, I'm going to tell a fake ass story. And people that know family life are going to know I'm sorry, my shit is fake. This is me in the mission talking the way I talk to myself, growing up the way I grew up working class. Okay, so forgive my cursing. And so if I tell only a nice, beautiful story about my dad, then I'm not telling the truth. But if I show the complexity, it could still end up being beautiful. And I think it is. I try to tell my dad's story beautifully so that people's hearts will open and understand. But I don't hide things about him that are usually hidden. So those are the parts that I selected to tell this story of unforgetting between the histories of countries and the histories of families and the history of myself. I forgot the most important, one of the most beautiful and powerful parts of myself, I believe, for me, is a part of me that was decided in the face of a fascist military dictatorship that killed 1,000 people in hours, half of them children, half of them under 6. And they perpetrated these slaughters, dozens of them. Before that reality, I got pissed off. I wanted to scream out. I wanted to do something more than just do humanitarian work. So I decided to join a revolutionary army. I became an urban commando, go blow shit up, military installations, infrastructure, etc. That was the most, I hid that part of myself for 25 years. Suyapa, Areli, Gilda didn't know this about me back in the day. Nobody did except my inner circle. And I hid that part of myself because it wasn't safe. So I basically forgot one of the best parts of myself. I allowed it because I didn't talk. But now I'm like, okay, the temperature's rising in the world. We're going to need to understand what it means to be revolutionary again. And that's what made me decide, okay, I'm going to come out and I'm going to tell the story behind, say, for example, these 2 women I met who were guerrilleras in Chalatenango, El Salvador. And I go on to tell these stories. And I think I'm sharing it with you all, with your generation, because I think you're going to need to face the challenges that your future looks like. You're going to need something more than these ideas of progressive or liberal Democrat, because progressive and liberal Democrats are the ones who started caging, separating, and killing Central American children like Barack Obama did. So you're going to need something more than progressive liberal. You're going to need something what I think is revolutionary. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
So we're well aware that we've had Roberto with us since 11 this morning. So I don't know if my colleagues agree, but maybe we'll give another 5 minutes, maybe.
I'm good in energy. I have my second win. I had this taco while you guys were talking, and I'm energized again. So don't worry.
And we know you're going to Cal State LA after, where you'll be with my brother and Esther Hernandez and others. So we want to give
communists, all of them.
And Alex, yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, maybe we have time for 1 or 2 more. What do you think? Question?
What time is my thing with UCLA? I mean, with Cal State.
It's at 4.
Okay, so let's couple more questions.
Beautiful. Thank you. So please.
Hey, so I have a quick question. What are you on the tacos are better in the Bay Area than in LA? Are you one of those Bay Area people? No.
Not tacos, burritos.
Then you're definitely a Bay Area person. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Giants over Dodgers. Burritos over LA's burritos. There's no
I don't know.
question.
This is a thing with the Bay Area. I didn't realize until I moved up there. Bay Area folks are really sort of staunchly defending their burritos. I'm like, okay, fine, you can have the burrito. debate. Anyways,
I have a question if the students are not going to ask a question.
Let's wait and see. I know you are now. They're waiting for you, Siapa, but let me just see if anyone else wants to get in. We have a lot of poets in the space too, so I'm also thinking if people want to reflect on kind of the role of poetry.
Well, I have something to say.
Poet. Yeah, I know. So, but I feel like I took Siapa, so I didn't pause for students.
No, okay, it's okay.
Jessica, oh, Emily or Jessica, or both.
Just briefly, I just want to, well, hello, I'm a senior at Pitzer College, and I do like to release or tell my stories through my poetry, and I really resonate and appreciate your commentary and your strong and your ongoing embrace of the word forgetting and unforgetting. And I myself, in my writing, like to use the phrase, desaprender es mi aprender. And so I say this to say, how do you go about addressing your audience? And also, you know how some words or some realities, you cannot necessarily translate them from like languages or from realities to different realities in terms of like worlds and whatnot. So my question is, how do you go about targeting your audience, and who is your audience and whatnot?
Good question, poets, writers question. I encourage you to keep doing it. I love your green walls back there. Well, I think the best answer I can give you is this. Read the book. It's my Le puse el todo por el todo. You feel my energy. You'll see it you'll feel it in the book. Quite frankly, I'm not trying to sell the book. It is my best effort to express and model behavior for other writers, for example. Like I talk in this about a tradition that I'm going to be reconstructing in one of my next other books, the poet warrior tradition that I belong to. Like you have poets like Roque Dalton, who's my friend's dad, who's a guerrillero poet. Because in America Latina, the distinction between poetry and politics was never like it is here. One of those things that doesn't translate into this environment because this environment wants us to believe they're separate, just like they want us to believe we're separate from America Latina. So I approach this storytelling in a way that erases the border and that shows the connection and erases the border between poetry and politics. Because I think that's going to be necessary for not just good writing in a moment of such epic crisis, but also because we're going to need sustainable spirituality before the challenges of your time. And to sustain spirituality, the work of the poet is essential and fundamental. It was for the revolutionary struggle that I belonged to. We would read poetry clandestinamente, secretly, whether we were guerrilleros or even if we were just civilians. And so I try to, I don't myself write for an audience, and I don't encourage writers to write for an audience because I think the audience has to be your own heart. For me, we need to figure out, go deep within ourselves to understand how our heart beats, how we breathe as a poet, for example. A lot of poetry is basically reproducing the heartbeat and the breaths in another that you have in yourself, right? And so the beat of the poet, the rhythm, the pauses, the breathing, it's you want to try to reproduce the experience to the degree possible. And to do that, I don't do it with a particular audience. I do it more from a perspective of, like, I don't want to say universal, but another human being who has a heart and who breathes like me. Now, if I had to choose an audience, it would be you all, the young people, especially the young Centroamericanas and Centroamericanos, you know, like that's near and dear to my heart. But I also want any young revolutionary, any young poet warriors to see themselves in my words, to see the history of their own trajectory and their own future in what I'm doing, because I'm consciously trying to be the bearer of a poet warrior tradition that I'm bringing and importing into the United States to, to put into the mixer, because politics here, as you all know, doesn't really really embrace Latinx identity or any of the sub-identities of Latinx identity, right? We are not existent in the Sunday talk shows. We're not in the Democratic Party convention, except for like 1 minute they gave AOC. We're not in literature, except 1% of literature in the United States. That's why I co-founded Dignidad Literaria with Miriam Gerber and David Bowles. We're not even telling our own stories. So my way of doing it is to do it by example. And let me just be frank again. Me valen un comino todos esos cabrones de todas esas instituciones. I have my truth that I've lived, and not a single one of them is going to be able to match my story, because it is my story. So I just encourage you to take that as your own. Nobody can own your story. Nobody can tell it better than you. Nobody can tell it more beautifully than you, and with the power of you. So stay tuned for my next book. The next book is going to be a short like pamphlet. It'll be called Letters to a Young Poet Warrior. Right? So there's my audience right there for that book. I hope that helps.
Thank you. We're just going to take one last question, Roberto. Emily, do you want to unmute? Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming. I wanted to ask about storytelling. It's something that I'm really interested in, but I've always had a hard time with how it affects those dearest to you, because like you said, it's your story, but at the same time, like there's others in it that you're talking about in a very personal way. Do you feel like you're able to balance following your own truth and what you need to put out there versus like not erasing your father's agency over his own story? And also, like, have you been able to like translate some of that story? How has he reacted, etc.?
It's great. I ask everybody before I start on the journey of interviewing them if they are okay with me telling their story. Number one, you have to get people's permission. You have to explain to them thoughtfully, look, here's what I'm going to do. And so I did that. Because if I didn't do it, I'd be in trouble with my family. They'd hate my guts. Damn, dude, you're outing Pop. You make them look like shit. That didn't happen. My family, on the day that my book launched, was my family here in San Francisco, my family around the United States, my family in El Salvador. We're all together on one of these Zoom calls, like, and some of my closest friends. We were all celebrating. You look at the cover. There's my mom. There's my mom. There's my dad next to her, and I'm pissed off at my dad. But then there's my dad at the bottom. And can you see what my dad's doing with his fingers, with his hands?
With the fist? He has his fist?
No, he's doing this, which in Salvadoreño is ojito de cangrejo, which in Salvadoreño means this. So, by cover, any Salvadoreño that looks close and see my dad like this, they're gonna laugh because it's a private joke among us. And that's really a lot how my dad is. He's a very funny guy, one of the funniest people you'll ever meet. And I bring out that beauty in my dad, along with his charisma and other parts. And so it's a very carefully constructed, like, reconstruction of who my dad is. It's not perfect, because no work of art ever is. But yeah, I took great care because I love my dad after all that we've been through with him in my 56 years. My arc of my story with my dad was love my dad, hate my dad, love and hate my dad, love, hate, and rebel against my dad, and then the state as a revolutionary, and then love again after understanding deeply his history. And so he knows the book has brought us back closer together. He loves being well known around the world now. The New York Times reviewed my book. My family loves it. They're proud of it. you know, and I try to do it as beautifully as possible. And I think the guarantee, there's no guarantee, but the closest thing to a guarantee as a writer, I think, is that you try to make it true and beautiful. If it's true, then nobody can deny that it's true. And if it's beautiful, then it's like, whoa, that's powerful, right? And people will appreciate it. I think, I'll just leave you with, not just for writing, but for political struggle and for life right now, you need to make impossible investments in the sublime and the beautiful. You're in for a long haul, young people. I've been through a long haul that some people would call apocalyptic violence, right? Because I've seen war, genocide, mass graves, death squads, killing by narcos, and trauma all across 2,500 miles in 30 years. But I don't have a bullet in my head, right? I've thought about taking myself out in the past, but the thing that kept me alive was my mother, even the love of my father, my siblings, the beautiful stories, my abuelita, the beautiful struggle, the revolutionary desire for a better world, right? You're going to need heavily invest in the sublime and the beautiful to sustain yourself in the world we're facing. And I guarantee you, you're going to feel good regardless of what happens. Because that's what the sublime and the beautiful will do for you, is carry you forward regardless of what happens. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, Roberto, for bringing inspiration, hope, revolutionary idea, and praxis to all that you do. And again, I think as Juan said, the vulnerability, right? You sharing your story, both here with us today and in your writing, as I always say, create space for others of us to know that our stories are important to share and to unmask those silences too.
Absolutely. And let me just put a plug. Please read my book. Please. If you like what I said, you'll love my book.
I think we all know that. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all. So for the Chicanx, Latinx, and Contemporary Society, I'll look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday. I have office hours at 4 if you want to get on the line there. I don't know if Arely and Siapa want to offer any final words.
Just thank you so much, Roberto, for this journey that you've brought me through. It took me a long time to finish the book. One, because when I like books, I don't like to finish them, because I'm like enjoying them so much. I like savor it. And two, because it brought up stories, that are secrets, right? That are still things that are unspoken in our community, in Honduras. And I just finished my book as well. And, it's that same struggle that you are having with, what to tell, how to tell it, how to organize it. Like, I feel you on that, definitely. And I don't know, like I was trying to weave my own family stories into my own writing. So most of the writing, and just for students there, most of your writing is about self sometimes, right? Because we're in a process of discovery. So I appreciate this. I want to keep talking to you. So I'm probably going to organize other spaces and invite all of you, because I also have some other burning questions. So thank you for being here.
My honor and privilege and pleasure. And tell your stories and go out and fight fascists, starting with Donald Trump.
You got it. I'm going to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you to CHS T128. I'll see you all on Tuesday.
All right.
Okay,
Bye,
thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you all. Take care.
Okay, I'm going to stop. So I stop recording and then it transfers it, right?
No. Can you not do that? Can you not do that? Let me control that. Is that okay?
Oh, shit. Oh, okay.
Yeah, because
sorry.
I need to,
okay.
I'm saving it in my computer. I'll share it with you later.
Okay.